In our last lesson, we introduced adding integers, and we introduced our number line model where we can think about walking forward or backwards along the number line to help us solve adding problems involving integers. What we're going to talk about today is subtracting integers. We can use our same walk back and forth on the number line model with subtraction. We just have to know how to adjust the model a little bit to work for subtraction. So what we're actually going to put right at the top of your notes is kind of an outline of how our number line model works with adding and subtracting. So we're not in the subtracting piece. So if you have a problem, so you're going to have a number and then either plus or minus another number. So this is kind of the outline for an adding or subtracting problem. So the first number, this is going to be whatever your first number is. That's going to be your starting position. So that's where you're standing on the number line. We know that from our adding model last week. And we know that this is our second number. Our second number tells us how far we're moving. So we know from last week that we can add here, or now we're going to introduce subtracting here. So this could be adding or it could be subtracting. So we know from last week that if we are adding, that we need to face the positive direction on the number line, which makes sense because if you think of adding, we like to think of things getting bigger. So we want to face towards the bigger numbers. So the twist that we're going to put on this, and it's really the only difference between adding and subtracting, although it is going to cause some slightly different things to happen that we'll talk about. If we're subtracting, the thing in the model that changes is the direction we're facing in our starting position. So if we're subtracting, instead of facing positive and facing towards the bigger numbers, we're going to turn around and we're going to face negative. We're going to face the smaller numbers. So you'll see what that looks like in just a second. And then whatever way you're facing, you would look at the second number, and if the second number is positive, then you move forward. So forward, whatever way you're facing is what's in front of you. So whichever way you're facing, you would move in front of you. And if the second number is negative, then we would go backward. So whatever way you're facing, backward is going to be behind you. So it doesn't really matter which way you're facing. Forward is always in front of you, backward is always behind you. So the difference between addition and subtraction is really this middle part, and it's which direction we face. According to the model. So we're going to look at some examples of subtraction so you can look at, well, how does this work? So we've got a subtraction problem here. So we have to look at our starting number and then our amount of movement for the subtraction problem. So our starting number is a 2 right here. But because we're subtracting, we are going to face this way. So before we were facing towards the positive numbers, but now we are going to turn our guy around and make our person face the negative direction. So that's the difference between adding and subtracting, is that now we're facing the other way. So our amount of movement is 6, and that number we're subtracting, because this is the minus sign, is telling us what to do. So the actual number in the box after the subtraction sign, that is a positive number. And we know a positive number means walk forward in front of you. Well, since we're facing negative or facing to the left, if you want to look kind of on your paper, forward is going to be to the left. We need to walk in front of us. So because we turned around, walking forward is now going to send us the opposite direction as it did when we added. So we're going to walk forward 6. So we're facing the other way now. So I have to go this way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's going to land me at negative 4. So that means 2 minus 6 is negative 4. Let's look at some other examples just to give you some good examples in your notes and kind of get you in the groove with how subtracting works. So again, here's our subtracting symbol. This is our starting position. And because we're subtracting, we want to face negative, face subtraction direction. So we're going to put our guy at -3. And we are going to face to the left, face the negative direction. Now, sometimes when we're subtracting a negative, we might put parentheses around the negative number just so the negative doesn't get kind of smushed into the subtraction. Because when there's two signs in a row like that, minus and negative, a minus sign and a negative sign look really similar. It's really easy to miss that there's a double sign there. So a lot of times when our second number is negative and we're subtracting, people like to put parentheses around it just so that you don't forget, hey, I'm subtracting a negative. Don't forget about that second symbol that's sitting there. So the parentheses don't really mean anything special. It's just to help you not lose track of the signs in the number. So our number that we are subtracting in this case is a -4. Well, negative means walk behind us. Since we're facing to the left, behind us is going to take us this way. So we're going to walk backwards 4 spaces. So right now we're at -3 and we're going to go back 1, 2, 3, 4. That's going to land us at 1. So that means -3 minus -4 is 1. Let's try a couple of others. So again, we're subtracting. Our starting position in this one's going to be -1. And because we're subtracting, we're going to face the subtracting direction, which is to the left or negative. And the amount that we're subtracting is 5. That's a positive number, so that means we're going to walk in front of us. Since we're facing left, in front of us is going to take us to the left. So we have to move 5 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's going to land us on -6. So -1 minus 5 is -6. I'm going to try one more just for good measure so you have lots of good examples in your notes to work with. So again, first number is our starting position. We're going to look at what we're doing because we're subtracting. We're going to face the subtracting direction. So we're going to start at 5, but we're going to face negative or to the left because that is the subtracting direction. So we're facing that way. And the number we're subtracting is -2. So since the number we're subtracting is negative, that means we need to walk backwards or behind us. Since we're facing left, behind us would take us to the right. So we're going to go backwards behind us 2 spaces since that's a negative. So 1, 2 is going to land us on 7. So -5 minus -2 is 7. So that is how subtracting works. So it should feel familiar because it is the same model. The only thing that we change is that when you subtract, you have to face the negative direction. So when you walk forward, you're now walking to the left. And when you walk backwards, you're now walking to the right. So rather than thinking in left and right, if you can just remember that adding you face positive, subtracting you face negative, and just think of in front of you and behind you, whichever way you're facing, then that can help you to keep this straight. So you should have your kind of outline of our model mapped out at the top of your notes, and you should have your 4 examples filled in. One thing that I will point out with subtraction, some of you in your examples from last week, your number line examples, were just kind of marking your starting position, but you weren't marking which way you were facing. So if you're not a super great artist, that's okay. You don't have to draw out your whole stick figure, but you need to at least mark your starting location and give me like an arrow to tell me he's facing the positive direction, or if you really want to be a girl, you can. She's facing the negative direction. So you need to somehow indicate which direction you're facing, because now that we're subtracting, there's 2 different ways we can face. We face positive when we're adding, but we face the other way when we're subtracting. So you can't just say, I'm starting here. You also need to say which way you're facing. And you can do that, if you don't want to draw out the whole stick figure with their head and everything, you can just do like an arrow to show which way you're facing. But make sure you're including that in your diagram for me so that I can see what you're doing, and also for yourself so that you don't get confused and forget which way you're facing. So what you're going to work on today is some